Hello and welcome back! Today we're finally going to be sewing again, and like I promised in my last video, we're going to be kicking off a slightly daunting project. I've been sewing for a few years now, and in that time I've never sewn a full suit. I think I've been putting it off because I'm a bit intimidated by the idea, but I've decided that it's time to face that fear and give it a go. And I know I've made some bold statements about breeches and trousers and the kind of people who wear them on this channel, but today we're going to start off by sewing a pair of mid-century fly-front breeches. Or trying to. While my version will be a lot simpler and less decorative, I'm using this painting as a reference. I drafted this pattern myself with the help of a tutorial over on Facebook by Sam Napoleon. It's also pretty heavily based off a few diagrams from The Cut of Men's Clothes by Nora Waugh. I've decided to work in linen because I thought it would be a good material to practice with before I move on to something like silk, and because I have a picnic coming up. Linen breeches sound more comfortable for the summer than a woolen kilt. So I have this medium weight linen from Burnley and Trowbridge, which will be my main fashion fabric. It's called pumpkin on their website, but I think it looks more like tomato or raspberry to me. On top of that, you'll need linen thread, buttonhole floss, a bit of cord, and button molds. Mine are made of bone. I started by cutting the legs from the red linen, 2 front pieces and 2 back pieces. I didn't quite have enough fabric to cut everything in one piece, and so I cut one of the back pieces in 2. Piecing was a very common practice in the 18th century, even on nice clothing, and all we need to do is backstitch the 2 pieces together and flat fell the seam. Now we've got one whole back piece. Then I basted everything together to check the fit. I think that was the biggest problem with the yellow breeches I made last summer. I didn't check the fit often enough, and they turned out a bit weird. So this time we're checking the fit semi-obsessively. Then I'm going to sew the outseams and the inseams of both legs with a back stitch using unbleached linen thread. You can also do this in a matching thread. If you're doing this by hand, it may get a bit tedious. Which reminds me, I'd love it if you dropped your favorite songs to listen to while you sew in the comments or recommended some music. I think there's a limit to how many more times I can stream Coraline by Måneskin before the good people at Spotify send someone to conduct a welfare check. Anyway, once those seams are sewn, I'm going to flat fell them to finish the raw edges. This time I'm using a matching thread to whip down the seam allowance to make sure the whip stitches won't be too visible from the outside. The next step is to connect them. I'm leaving most of the front open since that's where we'll be putting in our fly. If you're sewing full front breeches, you'll want to sew the entire front shut. Like last time, I'm cutting a thin strip of unbleached linen and pinning it along the back seam. Then, I'm going to backstitch this seam too, catching in the strip of linen. I'm also leaving a few inches of the back seam open at the top. Instead of using the seam allowance to enclose this seam, I'm going to fold the strip of linen over the back seam and fell it down. This is a pretty common 18th century technique, and it reinforces the seam, which is in a high stress area. The slit at the top of the back seam needs to be hemmed. Now we'll work on the fly, which I'm not super confident about. I made this little pattern piece, which follows the edge of the opening, and cut it out 4 times, twice from unbleached linen and twice from red linen. I'm turning the edges of the unbleached pieces under, as well as the raw edges of the fly, and then pinning the unbleached pieces to the inside of the breeches to cover the raw edges. Along the edge of the opening, I'm using a top stitch which I won't even try to pronounce. Then, I'm whip stitching around the bottom and along the other side to sew these little facings in place. Now for the pieces we cut from the red linen. I'm going to turn under all the edges, then sew the 2 pieces together by whip stitching around the edges, wrong sides together. This will be our buttonhole stand. Finally, I'm placing this piece inside the opening on the left side, letting it stick out from the main body just a little so that it overlaps the other side of the fly. I used a spaced out backstitch to top stitch it securely in place. Now, we've got something shaped like a pair of breeches. It would probably be wise to insert your pockets now. Unlike breeches from later in the period, plenty of mid-century breeches have flat pockets similar to those on waistcoats. You can see them in a handful of paintings and extant garments, and that's what we're going for today. However, I decided to leave the pockets for later and start on the waistband instead. I've cut 4 pieces, 2 outer halves of the waistband from the red linen and 2 lining pieces from pink linen. Before I assemble the waistband, I'm making a watch pocket in the right side of the waistband. I barely trust myself to sew a welt pocket, let alone teach anyone else, so I'm not going to talk about this part too much. There should be plenty of welt pocket tutorials online though. Here's how mine looked when I finished it. I also embroidered my initials onto the left side of the lining. Then we're going to iron all the edges under and pin the linings to the outer pieces, wrong sides together. The top and sides get top stitched together. Now we've got our waistband pieces prepared. We'll attach them by pinning the outer layer to the waist opening of the breeches, right sides together. The back piece will need to be pleated to fit. Then we'll sew them together with a sturdy back stitch. Once the outer layer is sewn in place, we'll just whip stitch the lining down to cover all the raw edges. Unfortunately, I don't have video of this bit. Part of the watch pocket bag should be hanging out, so we'll overcast those edges to keep them from fraying too much. We'll make 2 eyelets on either side of the back opening so that we can lace our breeches shut. Next, we'll work on the leg openings. As you can see, the back pattern piece has this little rectangular strip extending from it, which will become our button stand. We're going to cut 2 small rectangles of linen to face either side of the slit at the leg opening. Then fold the edges under and top stitch them in the same way we attached the fly facings. Here are mine before I iron them, looking pretty messy. I'm cutting a long, thin band out of red linen and a lining piece from pink linen. Then I'm going to pin the outer layer to the bottom edge of the leg opening, right sides together, and backstitch them together. I'm leaving the ends of the strip unattached so that they sort of hang free. Then I'm just folding under all the raw edges and applying the lining with that same top stitch to finish it. Now, all that's left to do is the pockets and some finishing touches. I followed another Facebook tutorial by Sam Napoleon for the pockets. This is the easier, less nice version. I'm cutting out 3 pieces: the pocket flap, the lining for the pocket flap, and a piece for the pocket bag. I'm starting by slashing open the pocket slit and folding under the bottom edge. Then I'm folding under one edge of the pocket bag piece and pinning it to the bottom of the opening on the inside of the breeches. This will be the bottom edge of our pocket, and I'm securing it with 2 lines of top stitching. I'm pinning the top edge of the pocket to the top edge of the slit without turning any edges under. Then I'm going to backstitch along this line to secure it. To finish the pocket bag, I'm backstitching up both sides and overcasting all the raw edges. Then we're going to prepare the flap by turning under the raw edges on the flap piece and the lining and sewing them both together with a top stitch. The top edge of the flap doesn't get folded under. Now that we've got the flap prepared, we're going to sew it onto the breeches to cover the slit. Since this is the quick and dirty version, I'm just whip stitching the top edge in place. All the raw edges under the flap get turned under and whip stitched down. Now for the finishing touches. We're going to make 15 buttonholes, 2 in the waistband, 3 in the fly, and 4 at each knee opening. Each knee band gets a buttonhole as well. Then we're going to assemble 13 linen-covered buttons to go with them. The buttonholes took me a while, and as always, I'm a bit frustrated by how wonky they are. These breeches use interchangeable buckles. This pair is paste, and it's from Sign of the Grey Horse on Etsy. The little toggle on the back goes through the buttonhole in the strap, and then we can buckle the breeches shut, using an awl to poke holes for the prongs. So there we go. The breeches aren't perfect, but they fit better than the last pair that we made, and I love the color. Stay tuned for the rest of the suit, which I'll cover in coming videos. But that's all for today. I've linked my Instagram and my Ko-Fi Coffee in the description in case you'd like to keep up with my projects or help support this channel. Until next time, stay safe and see you soon.